Welcome to Caledonia Sleeps, your peaceful escape into the heart of Scotland. Pull the blanket a little closer. The fire is burning low tonight, peat-scented and amber, and beyond the window, the hills are dark against a sky full of stars. There is no wind, only silence and the slow, steady warmth of the hearth. Tonight, we are going to talk about the fairy folk, not the ones you may have seen on greeting cards, not the gossamer winged creatures of Victorian illustration, small and sweet and sitting in flower cups. The fairies of Scotland are something older and stranger and considerably more interesting than that. In Scottish Gaelic, they are called the Sidhe. It is a word that carries several meanings: peace, quiet, and something else, the supernatural. The name tells you everything you need to know about how people thought of them. They were not fearsome in the way of monsters. They were the quiet ones, the ones who watched, the ones who lived alongside you, just beyond the reach of your ordinary senses, in the hollow hills and the ancient mounds and the places where the land felt different, older, charged with something you could not name. They were human-sized, most of them. That is always worth mentioning, because it surprises people. Not small, not winged, human-sized and clothed in the colours of the landscape, homespun greens and greys, and the faded brown of autumn heather. They kept cattle, played music, held feasts, raised children. They had their own laws and their own customs and their own pride, and they could be generous or dangerous or both at once, depending entirely on how you treated them. There were two great groupings that Highland and Lowland tradition recognised, known in Scots as the Seelie Court and the Unseelie Court. Seelie meant blessed or lucky. The Seelie Court comprised those fairies who were not exactly benevolent, but would return a kindness, who might warn a human of danger, who operated by something approaching fair exchange. The Unseelie Court was darker, the unblessed host, the ones who would harm without provocation, who rode the winter winds, who could not be reasoned with or appeased. But most of the fairy folk a person might encounter in daily life were neither purely seelie nor purely unseelie. They occupied a space between. Like the natural world they were tied to, the same natural world that could give you a bountiful harvest or destroy it in a night of frost. They were not moral in any human sense. They simply were what they were. To live well alongside them required certain things. Iron, which they could not bear to touch, was kept close. A nail in the door frame, a horseshoe above the lintel, a small iron pin sewn into baby's clothing. Rowan trees were planted near the house, their bright red berries marking the boundary between the familiar and the strange. Salt was scattered at thresholds, milk was left out in bowls, a small gift of thanks and acknowledgement, and above all of it, good manners were required. You did not mock the fairy folk, you did not speak their name carelessly, or dismiss them with a wave of your hand. You called them the good folk, the good neighbours, the people of peace. You gave them the respect you would give any powerful neighbour whose goodwill you depended upon. Tonight, sitting here by the fire, we will meet 4 of them, not as stories exactly, more as portraits, as introductions, because each of these beings has a character, a temperament, a way of moving through the world that is entirely its own. And I think you will find, as we sit here by the fire, that getting to know them is its own kind of pleasure. Come then, settle back, let the fire warm you, and let us meet them one by one. Imagine waking very early, before dawn, before the household has stirred. The fire is low, but still breathing. The kitchen is dim and cold, and smells of last night's supper. And everything, the floor, the hearth, the pots and pans, the grain in the corner, is exactly as it should be, better than as it should be. The floor has been swept, the grain has been threshed, the butter is sitting in the churn, worked through the night. The cattle in the byre are calm and settled, their hay freshened, their water clean. You did not do any of that. No one in the household did. It was done for you, in the dark, by the Brownie. The Brownie is the household spirit of the Scottish borders and lowlands, though stories of him are found as far north as Shetland and as far west as the Outer Hebrides. He is, in essence, the spirit of domestic labour, of the work that is always there, always waiting, always more than any one household can finish before the next day begins. He takes that excess on. He carries the burden of it through the night, willingly, without being asked. He is not beautiful. Sir Walter Scott, writing in his minstrelsy of the Scottish border in 1802, described the Brownie as meagre, shaggy, and wild in appearance, a creature of dark corners and dim recesses, thickened and roughened by work. His skin is the colour of old bark. His hands are labourers' hands. He wears rags when he wears anything at all. He is small and broad and strong, and he lurks in the unused spaces of the house during the daylight hours, the loft above the byre, the space under the stairs, the back room where the old furniture gathers dust, and he does not wish to be seen. The agreement, which was never spoken aloud, because it did not need to be, was that the household would never look for him, and he would work away. In exchange for his labour, the family left out food, a small bowl of cream usually, sometimes porridge or a piece of bread, left on the hearthstone in the evening without ceremony, without thanks, without acknowledgement, without even a glance toward the corner where he slept. This was essential. The brownie did not serve for pay. He served from devotion, from a bond with the household that was older than money and could not be reduced to it. To leave the food as payment, to make the offering too large, too pointed, too clearly a reward, was to misunderstand everything. The cream was not wages. It was simply evidence that he was remembered, that the family knew he was there. That was all he needed. The range of what brownies were said to do is, when you sit with the accounts, quietly extraordinary. They threshed grain through the night, work that in a pre-industrial farm household could take a full team of men several days. They churned butter, they swept floors and tidied rooms, and mended fences, and fed animals, and did the 100 small tasks that accumulated in any working household like sediment. In the border tradition especially, the brownie was said to be more useful than any human servant, faster, more thorough, working without rest, and requiring no supervision. One account preserved by Scott tells of a border brownie who, when the mistress of the house went into unexpected labour, and the servants sent to fetch the midwife from Jedburgh showed no urgency about leaving, took matters entirely into his own hands. He slipped on the servant's coat, rode the laird's best horse through the dark, and brought the midwife back, fording the swollen Tweed at dangerous speed, delivering her safely where she was needed, putting the horse back in the stable, and then going to the servants' room to administer what Scott dryly called a most merciless drubbing with his own horsewhip. The laird, so grateful for all this, had a green coat made up and left in the brownie's haunt as a gift. The brownie took the coat and was never seen again. He did not speak generally. He moved through the house in silence. He was heard sometimes, a rustle in the far room, the faint sound of movement in the small hours, but he was not seen, and he preferred it that way. To have the family see him was to collapse the careful distance that the relationship required. He was the spirit of the work, not the worker. He was what happened when you looked away. There is one thing that will end a brownie's tenure with a household absolutely and permanently, and it is kindness of the wrong kind. To give a brownie clothing is to lose him forever. The records are full of these departures, each one a small, dignified lament. The goodman of Glendevin left out clothes one night, and heard the brownie take his leave, calling out, "Gie brownie coat, gie brownie sark, ye'll get nae mair o' brownie's wark." A family at an old peel house gave their brownie what the servants thought was a fine gift, part of a suit of livery, and heard him depart crying, "Red breeks and a ruffled sark, ye'll no get me to do your wark." The brownie is not angry exactly, he is insulted. The offer of clothing, of wages, of uniform, of the outward markers of service, has turned something freely given into something purchased, and that he will not accept. The most famous of these departures belongs to the brownie of Bodsbeck, a farm near the head of Moffat Water in Dumfriesshire, sheltered in a fold of the border hills. Scott, who recorded the account in 1802, tells us that this brownie worked there undisturbed for generations, until an old lady of the household placed in his haunt a porringer of milk and a piece of money. The money is what matters here, not the milk, which was the customary quiet offering, the coin, the explicit payment. He was heard that night through the whole farm, wailing in the dark, and what he cried over and over until the grey of dawn came was this: "Farewell to bonny Bodsbeck." He was gone by morning. The tradition records another version too, one in which the Bodsbeck brownie is not the end of the story, but the middle of it. Some accounts say a brownie originally dwelt at Leithen Hall in Dumfriesshire, where he served faithfully until the heir of the estate, returning from abroad, was so troubled by his ragged, thin appearance that he ordered him clothed and fed. The brownie departed Leithen Hall crying, "Caw, cutty caw, all the luck of Leithen Hall gangs wi' me to Bodsbeck Hall." In a few years, according to the tale, Leithen Hall fell to ruin, and Bodsbeck flourished, until that too came to an end with the coin on the hearthstone. The luck, as it were, ran out twice. Why does clothing end a brownie? The folklore offers several explanations, none fully satisfying. Some say the brownie interprets clothing as an insult, the implication that he is too ragged, too poor, too low, and must be dressed up to be acceptable. Some say a gift of clothing releases him from willing servitude, and he takes the freedom offered. Some say, and this seems to sit closest to the heart of the tradition, that the brownie works from devotion, and devotion cannot be paid for. The moment the gift is large enough and pointed enough to constitute payment, the relationship becomes something else. He is no longer the spirit of the household. He is an employee, and that is not what he is. The lament "Farewell to bonny Bodsbeck" is not a curse, it is sorrow. The sorrow of a bond that has been misnamed, of a home that has stopped being home, that is not what it was, and he knew it, and he left. The lesson of the brownie is one of the oldest lessons the fairy folk have to teach. There are relationships that live in what is understood and not spoken, that exist in the gap between words. Name them, measure them, put a value on them, and they are gone. There are places in the northwest Highlands where the land folds in on itself and a birchwood fills the hollow. You come over a rise and there it is below you, silver trunks close grown in the damp ground, the canopy light and trembling, the floor deep with moss and wood sorrel. These woods are small usually, contained. They feel like rooms that the landscape has made for its own private use. In one such wood, in the country around Gairloch in Wester Ross, a birchwood in a hollow beside Loch Adrain, about 2 miles from where the Ruaray lighthouse would later be built, there lived, in the latter half of the 18th century, a being called the Ghillie Dhu. His name means the dark-haired boy. He was small and slender, with wild black hair, and skin that had taken on, over what must have been a very long time in that wood, something of the colour and quality of birch bark. His clothing, his covering more accurately, was moss and leaves, woven together into something that served both as dress and as camouflage. Standing still among the birch trunks, even in a good light, he was nearly invisible. The wood seemed to simply absorb him. He was a solitary fairy. This is worth pausing on, because it was unusual. The she most often moved in companies, the fairy host, the riding court, the gatherings in the hollow hills. The Ghillie Dhu had no company and seemed to want none. He tended his wood and watched the seasons and kept entirely to himself. He was a gentle and kind-hearted mountain spirit, a rather unusual nature fairy. He was the spirit of this wood, the specific hollow in Gairloch. But what was his purpose? He tended the wood. The birchwood is his and he keeps it. He knows every path through it, and he knows every tree and every creature that lives among them. He has been in this wood for long enough that he and the wood are, in some sense, the same thing. He does not seek contact with humans. Adults who caught sight of him at dusk, and over roughly 4 decades in the latter half of the 1700s, a number of people in the Gairloch area did catch sight of him, found that he was gone before they could approach. The accounts describe a small figure glimpsed among the trees at the edge of the evening light, and then simply not there when they looked more directly. He did not want to be found by adults, and he was very good at not being found. But children were different. The Ghillie Dhu had, by all accounts, a particular fondness for lost children, not in any sinister sense. Nothing was taken, nothing was required. If a child wandered into the wood and could not find their way out, the Ghillie Dhu would find them first. He would speak gently, he would offer to guide them, and he would walk them home through the dark at whatever pace the child could manage, patient and unhurried, his knowledge of the wood was absolute. The best known account of this involves a girl named Jessie McCrae, a local child who went out one summer evening to gather berries, stayed too long, went too deep, and found herself lost in the birchwood as the daylight failed. Jessie's sobbing drew the Ghillie Dhu to her. He appeared, spoke kindly, and offered to guide her home, telling her he knew all the paths, the rabbit's path, the fox's path, the deer's path, the path of men, and he led her out of the wood before dark fell entirely. She was the only person he was ever known to have spoken to directly. Over 4 decades of sightings, one conversation, and it was with a frightened child sitting alone under a fir tree. There is something very particular in that choice. He could have simply waited for her to calm down and find her own way. He did not. And then he went back into the wood and was not seen speaking to anyone again. The sightings thinned, and then they stopped. And in this case, unlike many fairy disappearances, we have an account of why. Osgood Mackenzie, the Gairloch landowner, whose 1921 memoirs drew on the oral testimony of his tenants, recorded that not long after the encounter with Jessie McCrae, a landowner named Sir Hector Mackenzie of Gairloch organised a hunting party of 5 men to seek the Ghillie Dhu out. The aim was to capture or shoot him. They searched through the night and found nothing, but the Ghillie Dhu, it seems, was aware of being hunted and was never seen again after that night. It is worth sitting with that detail for a while. He had tended that wood for 40 years. He had guided at least one child safely home, and a man with a gun and 5 companions searching for him in the dark was enough, we might reasonably conclude, to make the wood feel no longer safe. Whether the Ghillie Dhu withdrew to a deeper place within it, or departed entirely, or simply decided that being found by humans was no longer a risk worth taking, the accounts do not say. What they say is he was gone. The birchwoods around Gairloch are still there, still silver and close grown, still soft with moss in the damp corners. You can walk them on a grey October afternoon and hear nothing but the wind, but the quality of the quiet in certain places, near the water, near the old paths, is a particular kind of quiet, the kind that makes you feel, for just a moment, that something has just stopped moving. The Ghillie Dhu asks nothing of you directly. He does not want offerings or ceremonies or acknowledgement. What he seems to ask for, given what the accounts show, is simply that you move through his wood with care, that you do not take more than you need, that you notice what is there. Some people still leave small things at the edge of those birchwoods. A piece of bread on a mossy stone, a few late berries at the foot of a tree, not as payment, just as acknowledgement, a way of saying, I know this place belongs to something older than me, and I am walking through it with respect. Imagine a Highland cottage in, say, the 1750s. The fire is the centre of everything: light, warmth, the cooking of food, the drying of wet clothes. The walls are thick, the window is small. Outside, the November wind comes off the loch with nothing kind in it. There is a baby in the cradle near the fire, and the mother is watching it the way new mothers watch their babies, with that particular quality of attention that is both love and vigilance at once, that cannot quite relax, even in sleep. The fairy folk were real to this woman, not metaphorically real, not symbolically real, actually, practically, immediately real, in the way that the weather and the cattle and the state of the harvest were real. She knew the precautions: the rowan branch tucked into the cradle, the bright berried wood that the she could not abide, the iron nails worked into the bedpost, the urgency of baptism, because an unbaptized child occupied a strange threshold, not yet fully registered in the ledger of the human world, and the fairy folk were known to take an interest in such children. She knew all of this. She had taken all the precautions, and still, sometimes, the precautions were not enough. The Tàcharan is the Gairloch word for changeling. What it describes is a fairy elder, ancient beyond counting, placed in a human cradle in the shape of an infant after the real child has been taken away. The fairy folk, by the logic of this tradition, wanted human children for their vitality, for their health, perhaps as companions for fairy infants who were sickly or weak, for reasons the tradition never quite settles on. They left one of their own in exchange, disguised as a baby, to be cared for in the warmth of the human household. The changeling was recognisable eventually. It cried without ceasing, a thin, persistent, wearing cry that had no comfort in it and was not satisfied by feeding or holding or warmth. It fed enormously and never grew. It did not thrive in any of the ordinary ways, and its eyes were wrong. Changelings were wizened and emaciated, yet their utter childness blended with occasional flashes of what she called mother's wit, moments of surprising sharpness or knowledge that seemed far beyond any ordinary infant. Those flashes were the giveaway. Left alone, the parents gone to the field, the neighbour stepped outside for a moment. The creature in the cradle would sometimes drop its disguise. The baby face would give way to something older. It might sit up and play music with the sureness of someone who had played for centuries. It might speak in a voice with too much age in it for the body it occupied. One account from Lewis, describes a changeling who, when left alone with a visiting tailor, transformed into a bearded old man and sat up to entertain the visitor by playing the fire tongs. He was delighted with himself. He had been waiting for an audience. The Tàcharan was, underneath everything, very old. He had been using the household as a care arrangement, and occasionally, when conditions were right, he found it quite amusing. The tests for identifying a changeling were practical, sometimes elaborate, and all pointed toward the same goal, making the creature reveal its true age, because the disguise required effort to maintain, and the one thing that could reliably break it was laughter, the kind that comes from genuinely not being able to help yourself. J.F. Campbell, in his 1860 Popular Tales of the West Highlands, recorded one of the most fully described tests from Islay. A smith suspected his son had been replaced. A neighbour advised him, "Take a basket of empty eggshells and a bucket of water, and carry the eggshells as though they weigh as much as anvils." The smith did exactly this, staggering and grimacing across his kitchen floor for as long as it took. The changeling lasted perhaps 10 minutes before the sight of a grown man treating empty eggshells as the heaviest objects in the world became too much. It sat up, dropped the baby face entirely, and announced, still laughing, that in 800 years of living it had never seen a man brew ale in eggshells. 800 years. The age in that detail is worth sitting with. What was in the cradle was not young. It was very, very old, and it had been perfectly comfortable being there, and now it had been caught out. Once identified, the changeling could, in theory, be sent back and the real child recovered through fire, through exposure, through the right words spoken at the right crossing. The methods varied by region and by account. The goal was always the same, the restoration of what had been taken. We should sit honestly with what this tradition was also carrying. The changeling belief gave people in the Highlands and Islands a way to understand children who were very ill, children who cried without ceasing, children who fed and never grew, children whose development was unexpected, whose behaviour was bewildering, who seemed in some fundamental way to be somewhere else even when they were present. In a world without medicine or diagnosis, or in any framework for what those children were experiencing, the changeling story offered something. It said, "Your real child is somewhere else, and whole. What is in the cradle is not yours. Your love is intact." That was, in its way, a mercy. It preserved the parents' capacity to love the child they remembered. Susan Shun Eberly, in a 1988 paper in the journal Folklore, examined changeling belief across the British Isles through exactly this lens, as a folk framework for conditions that would today be understood as developmental disability, failure to thrive, or severe illness. Her argument is not that people were wrong to hold these beliefs, but that the beliefs were doing real work. They were carrying genuine grief in a form the community could share and discuss and act upon. But the belief placed the children who remained, who were present, who were real, who had needs that the changeling story declared to be fairy needs rather than human ones, at risk of something that was not a mercy at all. The shadow of that lies honestly across the tradition, and we should not move past it without acknowledging it. Both things are true. The grief was real, and the story was kind, and the story had a cost. That is the nature of the Tàcharan. It carries contradictions that do not resolve. It is the most human of the fairy folk in that way, the one that tells us most directly about how we cope when love meets something it cannot explain. The Tàcharan does not ask anything of you at all. It simply sits in the cradle and waits to be understood, and maybe that is the point. The precautions against it were worth taking. The rowan in the cradle, the iron in the bedpost, the baptism hurried, not because fairies were definitely real, but because the act of taking precautions was itself a form of love, of saying, I see you, I am watching, I will do everything I know how to do. And then the long vigilance sitting beside the fire, with the baby in the cradle and the winter wind at the window, watching. The Baobhan Sìth is the most dangerous of the four beings we are meeting tonight. I want to say that plainly, because there is a temptation when making a sleep program to soften everything, and the Baobhan Sìth does not deserve to be softened. But here is the thing: knowing what something is, understanding its nature, its habits, its weaknesses, is itself a form of safety. The people who told these stories in the Highland glens were not trying to frighten each other. They were sharing information. They were saying, here is what is out there. Here is what it looks like. Here is how to recognize it. Here is how to survive it. So let us approach the Baobhan Sìth the same way, with clear eyes and a warm fire, and a reasonable distance between us and anything that might be listening. The Baobhan Sìth belongs to the darkest part of the fairy world. The name translates mildly enough as fairy woman. The translation is not adequate. They appear as beautiful women. That is always the beginning. Beauty, perfectly suited to what is in front of them. They wear long green dresses, green being the colour of the fairy folk throughout Highland tradition, and those dresses sweep the ground and conceal their feet. This is relevant because their feet are not human feet. Where feet should be or the cloven hoofs of a deer. This detail appears in multiple versions of the tradition, and it is the detail that most often saves those who survive. They are drawn to hunters specifically. The tradition links this to the smell of blood, game blood on clothing, on hands, and to the particular vulnerability of men far from home, tired after a long day, their guard lowered by warmth and firelight. A recurring pattern in the stories is that they appear almost immediately after a wish is spoken aloud. One hunter says what all of them are thinking, that the only thing missing from a perfect evening is female company, and almost before the sentence ends, they are at the door. The tradition links this to an old Scottish belief. A wish made at night without God's protection would be granted, but never in the way you intended. In one recorded tale, there were 4 hunters who took shelter from the night in a lonely shieling, a Highland bothy, stone-walled and low. One supplied the music, singing while the others danced. They expressed their wish for company. 4 women in green entered without being invited, with the ease of those who have never needed permission. 3 danced, the 4th sat beside the singer. He was the one who noticed the blood, drops falling from his companions as they danced. He went for the door immediately, reached the horses tethered outside, and pressed himself in among them. The Baobhan Sìth chased him, but the horses were iron-shod, wearing iron horseshoes from the morning's work, and the women could not approach. It is the iron in the horseshoes that acts as a barrier. The horses themselves would not have repelled a fairy woman otherwise. The man kept still among them. He watched the eastern sky. When dawn came, the women were gone. He went inside. His 3 companions were dead, drained of blood. A second related variant of the tale, also in the tradition, involves one of the hunters noticing the hooves before the dancing had gone on long. A flash of something below the hem, something cloven and wrong. He backs towards the door, saying something, moves quietly. He reaches the horses. He survives. In the morning he finds his companions with their throats cut and their chests laid open. There is a third version in which 4 hunters shelter in a cave rather than a bothy. Each man expresses a wish for his sweetheart, except one, a man named McPhee, who says he would rather his wife stay at home. When the women appear and the killing begins, McPhee survives in this version, protected not by iron shoes, but by his black dog, who drives the women away. What the 3 variants share is the structure, a careless wish spoken in the dark, the immediate arrival of something that answers it exactly, and one man left alive because he paid attention when the others did not. The deer hoofs are worth pausing on. Deer hoofs beneath the dress of a fairy woman who hunts hunters. This pairing suggests something. even if we cannot trace it directly to any primary source. It could imply a connection to older beliefs about the hunt itself, that the animals taken had their own relationship with the spirit world, that killing without proper acknowledgement or ritual carried a consequence. The idea that failing to observe the right customs after a successful hunt could draw something dangerous from the wilderness back along your tracks. This pattern appears in other Highland traditions, and it is reasonable to wonder whether the Baobhan Sìth belongs somewhere in that older country of belief. We cannot say so with certainty, but the deer hooves make a kind of sense that goes beyond coincidence. Whether or not that is the true route, the practical warning is clear. The Baobhan Sìth comes when men are alone in the wilderness, far from community and custom, tired and warm and wanting. She answers the wish exactly. The price is everything. The protections are iron, always iron, carried on your person in whatever form. A nail in the pocket, a knife in the belt. Iron does not need to be charmed or worked into any form of talisman. It simply needs to be present. This is consistent across all versions of the tradition. Daylight is the other absolute protection. The Baobhan Sìth vanishes at dawn completely in every account. If you can hold still until the sky lightens in the east, you are safe. And in the McPhee variant, a dog, a loyal living creature between you and the danger. Whether this holds more broadly across the tradition or applies only to that specific account is not clear, but it is worth knowing. I said at the beginning that knowing what something is a form of safety. I believe that to be true, and I want to end this portrait by pointing out that the Baobhan Sìth, for all their danger, are consistent. They come when called into being by a careless wish. They are stopped by iron. They vanish at dawn. There is a logic to them, cold and absolute. The tradition that preserved these stories was not trying to produce fear. It was trying to produce knowledge, to say, here is what is out there. Here is what it looks like. Here is how you live alongside it. The people of the Highland Glens lived alongside the Baobhan Sìth the same way they lived alongside dangerous weather and dangerous water and the long dark of winter, by knowing them, by taking them seriously, by keeping the right precautions close, and by staying, whenever possible, near the warmth of the fire. The fire has burned very low, just the last of the embers now, shifting and settling into grey. The room is warm, but the warmth is quieter than it was an hour ago, gentler, the kind of warmth that makes you want to close your eyes. We have spent this evening with 4 of the fairy folk. The Brownie, who worked through every night from devotion. the Ghillie Dhu, who kept his birchwood in the northwest Highlands and spoke once to a lost child in the summer dark, the Tàcharan, who sat in the cradle and carried within it all the bewildered grief of parents who could not understand what had happened to the thing they loved, and the Baobhan Sìth, who came when they were called and stopped at iron and vanished with the dawn. 4 beings, 4 temperaments, 4 different ways of moving through the world, and yet, when you lay them alongside each other, a single thread runs through all of them: attention. That is what all of the fairy folk required in the end. Not grand ceremonies or elaborate rituals. Attention. The habit of noticing what is around you, of treating the land and its inhabitants with the seriousness they deserve. The brownie needed to be noticed without being named. The Ghillie Dhu needed the wood to be walked through with care. The Tàcharan needed to be watched for, guarded against, its signs recognised in time. The Baobhan Sìth needed you to be paying enough attention to notice a hem that never lifted from the floor. The people who told these stories lived in a world where that quality of attention was survival. The weather, the animals, the state of the harvest, the mood of the loch in winter. Everything required you to be present and observant and humble about what you didn't know. The fairy folk were an extension of that. They were the part of the landscape that was intelligent and motivated and required to be taken seriously. Calling them the good folk, the good neighbours, was not naive. It was diplomatic. It was the same respect you would extend to any neighbour whose goodwill you depended upon, not because they were uniformly good, some of them were not, but because names have power and mockery has consequences, and the world is larger and stranger than you can see from your own doorstep. Scotland is still full of the places where they lived, the hollow hills, the birch glens, the dark sea lochs, the high moors where the wind comes down without obstruction. You can stand in those places on an ordinary Tuesday and feel what the stories were pointing at. The sense that you are not the only one there, not frightened, just aware, just small in a good way, in the presence of something that has been here longer than you and will be here long after. That is enough. That awareness, that small acknowledgement, it is enough. Sleep now. The fire will look after itself for a while yet, and the good neighbours, wherever they are tonight, in the hollow hills, in the birchwoods, in the fold of the border hills above the Moffat water, are going about their own business, as they always have. They are not thinking about you, which is, all things considered, exactly how you want it. And if tonight's company brought you peace, if the good folk were good to you this evening, share Caledonia Sleeps with someone who might enjoy it. Leave a like if it helped you sleep, and subscribe so that next time we can go deeper still into the heart of Scotland. Good night from the fireside. Good night from Scotland. Good night